pleasant good evening to all my fans, to all viewers and listeners from every corner of the globe. Once again, welcome to your favorite knowledge channel. It's my pleasure this evening, or good morning or good night, depending on the part of the world where you are located, to bring to you yet another weekly presentation. I know you have been enjoying the messages, I know you are promoting the channel, and I want to encourage you to continue so doing. So last week I began a discussion on your mental health being top priority. And this week I'm doing a part 2 of that presentation. However, the topic for today's presentation is the impact of trauma on mental health. Alright? But as usual, we will start off with a motivational word, and the motivational word will be linked to the topic itself. And then we will talk about the services we offer, and then I will get into the presentation. So today, actually, I read the comments of a fellow psychologist, Dr. Chateau, today on the Trinidad Guardian, where she indicated that today actually is Suicide Prevention and Awareness Day. So doing this presentation of mental health is appropriate given today being that kind of day, and also the ravaging impact of mental health, not just from a COVID point of view, but as I said, our topic today, we will look at the impact of trauma on mental health. Now, the motivational word is that many persons sometimes in need of help, they do not seek such help. So my word to you, my message, my encouragement to you is that seeking help for any mental problem is not a sign of weakness. So once again, seeking help for any mental problem, any mental illness or challenge, it is not a sign of weakness. So if you need it, please seek it. I repeat, if you need help for a mental challenge, please seek the help that you need. And just to paraphrase the words of the late great Merchant, that prolific composer, I'll just take a line. You've got to seek that help that you need, not later, but now. So once again, seeking help is not a sign of weakness. And if you need help, seek it now, but not later. It may make a difference between life and death. It may make a difference in terms of you continuing to be productive in your lives. So meditate on that word and see its value. And if it applies to you in a direct manner, use it as a motivation to take action. Having presented the motivational word, I would now like to remind you once again that as a life coach, we are available for one-on-one consultations and one-on-one sessions to help you improve, to help you fulfill your potential, to help you be the best you can be, to guide you, to equip you with some of the fundamental requirements where you can become better in your craft, in your life, you name it. We also offer workshops in a range of areas: emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, anger management, communication skills, the role of psychology in business, entrepreneurship, leadership, among a host of other topics. So if you are interested in any specific area or other areas of interest, we are quite willing and able to provide those services for you. So we remind you to call 1-868-778-5141, 1-868-779-2544, or you can email us at leadershipwithadifference@gmail.com. So once again, those numbers: 1-868-778-5141, 1-868-779-2544, or email us at leadershipwithadifference@gmail.com. Right, so you had your motivational word, we reminded you of our services, And now we will start today's presentation. Now, according to the American Psychological Association, trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event such as an accident, rape, or natural disaster immediately following the incident. However, things such as shock and denial could be more long-lasting, and they can have a very debilitating impact where people have unpredictable emotions, they have flashbacks, they have strained relationships, and they may even manifest physical symptomology such as headaches and being nauseous, etc. So that definition is a starting point to give us a guide. We must also consider that the cause of it can be an overwhelming negative event that has long-lasting mental and emotional impact in terms of destabilizing an individual. And as I mentioned earlier, events as rape, events as natural disasters, losing a loved one, severe illnesses, probably becoming bankrupt, etc. All of these can be traumatizing events. According to the APA, there are also different aspects of it. It could be singular in terms of an event. Singular event. It can be complex in terms of repeated exposure to the traumatic situation, or it can be complex where you have repeated exposure that is very much invasive and at an interpersonal level. So when we think of the transatlantic slave trade, and when we think of the whole process of slavery that followed in the Americas, all right, we know that if we talk about an overwhelming negative event, the transatlantic slave and slavery has been described, according to Ome, 1919, his book, The Story of Emancipation, as the most abominable event, negative event against humanity, all right, where 38 to 42 million sons and daughters of Africa were forcibly removed. Millions died on the way, millions died on the plantation. So if you think of that event in terms of the impact of trauma, we could very well appreciate its damaging effects on our ancestors and us today, which of course what I'm saying here is not an excuse for unproductive behavior, but understanding the antecedents of a lot of the psychological problems among the African community certainly is important to look at slavery as definitely one of the most overwhelming, or if not the most overwhelming negative event you could think about, which certainly will have produced tons and tons of trauma. So I cited that event, because I think that, when we think of the impact of trauma and mental health, all of the other incidents that I've spoken about so far definitely, have and continue to impact people in ways that, are long-lasting, all right? Particularly when people who have suffered traumatic events never receive any form of psychological intervention. So as a consequence of that, any kind of reminders, we spoke about flashbacks in the definition, any kind of reminders of anything in their physical and immediate environment certainly will carry them back to a very negative place without help, So it is very important, as a means of assisting that this conversation that I've started here, it continues far and wide, it continues within the walls of academia, it continues in communities, it continues wherever people exist, because the effects of it are very real. Now, all groups are affected by different traumas, but in terms of the African community, I think it's a special case that requires special attention. There have been a few psychologists who have done studies in this area, but I think it is still too few, and more psychologists need to get involved in really, forming councils. I would suggest a global council or councils in different parts of the world, particularly among practitioners of African origin, and any other human being who is concerned, because the problems of one group is the problem of every other group. So once you are concerned psychologists, I think it is important that you could appreciate that the research and discussion and debate is very important in terms of establishing proper measures, proper policies, proper new approaches in terms of really assessing and understanding the kind of impact that that kind of trauma would have had. Because I remember, a particular course that I teach, history and psychology, history and systems psychology. You had a situation where after the Second World War in the United States of America, many of the returning soldiers were severely traumatized and had long-lasting mental and emotional bouts of instability. And they had very few practitioners at the time to really address the concerns, the mental fallout from being, people who participated in war. And as a result of that situation, there was an acceleration in terms of people getting involved in clinical psychology and in terms of the medical approach to treating mental problems, psychiatry in the US. So that event, was a propelling force in terms of driving, the growth of clinical psychology and psychiatry in the United States of America as a response to deal with that situation. When you think of the impact of chattel slavery and the traumatic impact it would have been, I have, never heard in the 56 years of my life of any focused approach to address that phenomenon. So, according to Hicklin et al. In the book Perspectives in Caribbean Psychology, where they were looking at that traumatic impact of slavery, and they describe it, as a sophisticated and highly organized operation that was designed to infiltrate the infrastructure of the African man and woman. And how was this achieved? They so described slaveholders, who gave them that authority, but they so described slaveholders. They separated, according to Hicklin et al., they separated slaves from different families and different linguistic backgrounds, and they mixed them with other groups of slaves who spoke different languages. What was their aim? They were trying to dissipate effective communication. They were trying to dissolve any chance of revolution. Of course, they didn't survive. They didn't succeed, so to speak, in preventing that. We had the successful case of Haiti, and we had slave revolts throughout the region. So the point Hicklin et al. Was trying to make is that act of slavery and the methods they use, where they instill, fear, distrust, and envy, that activity 400, 500 years ago still resonates today, in that fear, distrust, and envy is so prevalent among the African communities in the world. Because when we talk of inherited traits not only relate to biological inheritance, it also relates to the inheritance of psychological traits. So those seeds of division were well sown, right, along the lines of skin color, along the lines of privilege. We know the whole concept of the house slave and the field slave. So that whole aspect of class, all of those elements contributing to that, If you were in the house, you were treated better, all right? If you're of a different shade in terms of your complexion, you will give a different kind of consideration. So all of those negative elements still linger, the level of distrust that exists. And of course, according to Hickling et al., that activity of slavery and the slave trade was the beginning of the destruction of the self-identity of the African man and woman, and also what they describe as psychic fragmentation. So psychologically, the fundamental aspects of the identity of the African man and woman. Now you may ask yourself, how is this linked to the impact of trauma? It is certainly well linked when you think of how relationships have been compromised. Now it doesn't mean that every African family in the world has issues in terms of family life, but certainly in terms of the stability of the family, according to Hickling et al., the family, because of those ways where they separated families, where masters would have had pleasure at their desire of female slaves, where sturdy male slaves were used as studs, etc. The whole question of the family concept was destroyed. The whole question of the sanctity of marriage was dismantled, all right? And according to Hickling et al., that feeble structure that many of us can attest to still persists today. So many years ago, many of you will have seen a movie called Roots by Alex Haley, where what was depicted in that movie was discussed in a book called The Making of a Slave. Now when we go back to what Hickling et al. Said, and they were psychologists and psychiatrists who wrote that book, Perspectives in Caribbean Psychology, what the slave process did is to what you would call dehumanize and deculturalize the African community, in that they were discouraged from practicing their tradition. They were discouraged from sharing their stories. And the whole aim was to create a people devoid of a history, a past, and a future. And what they did, they instilled Eurocentric values and religious beliefs. Now, those of you who practice Christianity, I am not condemning your practice, but your ancestors, in terms of the African community, they did not come to the Caribbean as Christians, and they were beaten out of their traditional practices. As a matter of fact, upon conversion and given their cultural orientation, many of the slave owners view the lively way in which they worship as a paganization of the Christian religion. But they must note as a starting point, that in itself was never their religion. So the point I'm trying to make here in terms of the psychological impact is that if you are taken away from who you are, you have now become an alien. And if you have now become an alien in terms of your true identity, it means to say that mental and psychological issues certainly will persist, because there will be a conflict constantly in terms of your innate nature to operate in a certain way and what was forced upon you. And a while ago I was citing the movie Roots. So the slave's name was Kunta Kinte, as you will know from the movie, and the master was whipping him into the new knowledge that his name was Toby. And every time he said no, he was whipped into the acceptance of a Christian name that, of course, his parents didn't give him. So that whole process is synonymous with what they call the making of a slave, where they were destroyed psychologically, they were maimed and beaten badly physically. So it wasn't only a physical impact or the trauma of this overwhelming negative event, where for any deviation from these forced rules, they were mutilated, they were beaten, they were killed, they were shamed, right? So it was a total process That is why when they refer to it as psychic fragmentation, they are very much correct. And because of that psychic fragmentation, some of the psychological fallout continues to linger in terms of lack of acceptance of skin color, hair type, body image, and problems in terms of interpersonal relationship, problems in terms of building community, problems in terms of trusting each other. So the psychological impact was truly well sown, and I have cited and discussed that particular example to show you that when we think of what trauma does in terms of instability of emotions, in terms of making relationships problematic, in terms of flashbacks that bring you to a very dark place, you can see that the traumatic impact of that slave experience is something that is really desirous of ongoing research, and there must be a greater commitment, as I said earlier on, among psychologists to really find long-lasting solutions. So the problem must be clearly identified, the problem must be acknowledged, the problem must be discussed, the problem must be researched in a deep way, as I mentioned earlier on, and we definitely need to have communities of psychologists really zeroing down and providing solutions. All right. So our obvious solution is seeking help, in terms of normal trauma. But when you think of the cumulative impact that of the trauma produced on the psyche of the African community or any other community in the world who would have been subjected to such devastating action by other groups of people, we can see that traumatic events is certainly something that could destroy, could actually destroy a person, because some of the symptomology of trauma are both physical and emotional. At the physical level, a person may appear pale, a person may appear fatigued, a person may have poor concentration, and of course things like racing heart. They can certainly have panic attacks and high anxiety. So the traumatic impact on mental health is a very, very, very critical area that requires intervention. As I said, things like rape, things like domestic abuse, etc. When people are not given attention at all, they struggle throughout their lives, from childhood to adulthood, and they even die having suffered, the emotional pain and turmoil without getting the help, having the challenges of being reminded of things that happen around them. And I'm saying in the same way that those events are so devastating, the cumulative impact of the trauma of slavery has really, contributed to a lot of the lingering problems among the African community in the world. And this discussion here is just one of many that we will have on the channel in terms of creating increased sensitivity to this issue, increased awareness, and really driving home the point to psychologists who are listening that more has to be done, more must be done. At a personal level, I continue to do my part by raising these discussions. I continue to do my part by being of support and assistance to anyone that I can be of assistance to. And the question to you, will you also? And it's important that the answer is in the affirmative. Those who are trained, those who are concerned, building communities, building bridges, so that those who are traumatized can be given a platform to better pivot, to better deal with their issues, to find solutions, and to create a more stable mental environment. So I know you have received the message from this presentation. I want you to really digest it, consider it, and consider what part you can play in this process of helping so many of our community who are so traumatized even 500 years later. So thank you once again for listening. And as usual, I remind you, once the message resonated with you, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, comment on the video, comment on the other videos, encourage your friends and family to become new subscribers, and let us continue spreading the message of enlightenment. So thank you, and stay tuned for another presentation next week. Of course, our numbers 1868-778-5141, 1868-779-2544, or you can email us at leadershipwithadifference@gmail.com. So stay positive, stay tuned, and continue subscribing. Thank you very much, and bye.